Hello, my friend. Welcome to part two of this conversation with James Cooke, a neuroscientist, writer, and speaker focusing on consciousness, meditation, psychedelic states, science, and spirituality. If you haven't had a chance yet, definitely head over and listen to part one before moving into this conversational space with us. And yeah, just wanted to thank you for being here. And the Daydreamer podcast is here to help you cultivate your own practice of presence, to help you contribute more fully and in your own unique, particular way towards the ever-emergent blossoming of the unfolding world story. So, I hope that you enjoy the deepening of this conversation. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. There was kind of a recognition of some I don't know, like psycho-spiritual emotional work that needed to take place of some sort, and there was a real intention or a real kind of momentum shift in the and a kind of influx of power in that direction purposefully, and you've
Right.
gone into these spaces and intentionally aim to undo some of these knots that have been built up over long periods of time, deep into your past. Yeah, coming into deeper states of presence and intuitively feeling into what your body requires in certain moments.
Right.
Does that sound true?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's on the one hand, it felt very, ego James knew what he wanted and had a conceptual map for this and knew what trajectory I was going in and could guide it. But the actual process was one of passivity, of surrender, of opening. And so it's more of a, kind of getting out of your own way. Um, yeah. So you have, and it's not just psychedelics, I mean, it's an interesting thing is, as I said, you can be completely, have all this embodied stress, feel fundamentally afraid, have faced and continue to face challenges, me at the age of 13, and yet you can still connect with this fact of being. You can get out of a mindset of doing and just exist in the present moment. It's possible. But again, it's not going to be very integrated and sustained, and your behavior is likely to come out in unconscious neurotic ways. You see kind of abuse in from spiritual teachers and stuff like that. It's very possible to have these insights and be deeply unintegrated and to then act out in pathological ways. Um, and then for me, then there was a process of, okay, uh, you've got this kind of awakened perspective, but then it keeps collapsing back into an ego, and it's not sustainable, or it's not sustained being in that one, in the kind of awakened state. So then the process for me was, how do I get this organism to be, again, like a Taoist kind of conception of a thing that's just the unfolding with the flowing of the river, with no interference from the ego and with the sphere stuff. And so one thing is, you physiologically start to open yourself up with psychedelics is one way that I have done it. Even just massage, like I had a masseuse who would massage my stomach in this way that was really, I mean, it was so deep and intense and confronting to be prodded very deeply in your stomach. There's all this kind of soft muscle fascia where you carry all of your emotional reactivity, and that was incredibly powerful. That also allowed me to drop down another level with this stuff. Yoga, this is why yoga is a spiritual tradition, because it allows you to move into this, yoga meaning union, into this state of mystical kind of non-dual insight. Um, and so there are lots of different ways to do it, but for me, it's about bringing this organism into alignment with the unfolding of the world. And even when you're doing meditation or something you conceptualize as mental, we know that there are neurophysiological changes going along that underpin different changes in consciousness, different changes in your habitual mental patterns. So the whole process is one of being a physical thing that is becoming into alignment with the bottom up kind of flowering in existence, rather than this egoic interfering, um, which is often how we live our lives.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what role kind of your sharings online and just even us having this conversation that plays in your life in terms of this process.
Yeah,
And yeah.
that's a great question. I've not been asked before, but it's definitely part of the process. I've always had a deep instinct uh, to try to help. I guess I think service is the kind of the ultimate good, like to spend your life on. And you could say that comes from a basic human instinct or a basic living thing instinct of empathy, of seeing other things like me that suffer and wanting to help relieve suffering. There could be an extent to which it comes from a neurotic place of projecting my own suffering of, but I feel like that's not so much part of it, because it's I try to bring to awareness if that's an aspect of it. So I think it's yeah, so that's why I do it. But then the actual project of it as well, another benefit I get from it is it keeps me it keeps me going on this path, because it can be confronting to put yourself out there in a public way. Can bring up, again, as social primates, interpersonal anxieties. A lot of people are terrified of public speaking. I've not been that work. I've never been had that much of a problem with public speaking, but it can still bring up concerns of, yeah, egoic concerns of how you're perceived and how you're what people think of you, if you're making sense. And so I think when I first started doing it, it was a really helpful way for me to feel what would come up when I would do these things, and almost just to challenge myself, put myself in a position that some people were just like, no way, I'm not going to do that, it's too scary. But instead to put myself in those positions and then be like, okay, what do I need to do um, to feel that I can navigate this well? And actually, that's the other point I should have said when I was talking about how you, in an embodied way, can come more into alignment with this absolute perspective. A big part of it is it's not just about passively opening yourself and surrendering and that stuff. As I indicated before, that happens in parallel with the process of empowerment, where you're actually, as well as being uh, this kind of flowering of the universe, you also do have the capacity to make decisions. You are an agent, and so you learn to develop skills and to resource yourself and become aware of what's going on in your world. And through that process, you learn to trust yourself, not just trust yourself again, like blindly, but to really think like, okay, I've really got my own back here. I know how to look after myself. Self care is another part of this. Deprogramming yourself from societal narratives that prevent you from doing that. And so that's another kind of important part of this process. Uh, yeah, that might have taken us a bit off topic from your question
Off
there.
topic's fine. I'm kind of a little bit more curious in this direction. So when we're talking about this kind of these things that come up for you in terms of the sharings, like certain vulnerabilities and emotional knots that still kind of arise, maybe through the process of that participation or that service. Yeah, this is kind of matching to what we were talking about earlier around the masks, and I've thought about this, and it seems like, yeah, it's something that has made me personally feel quite reluctant in certain arenas to be sharing more is the idea of like layering more masks on rather than removing them. And
Oh,
I was
interesting.
wondering, yeah, what you see about that, and if you see that happening, or you just feel like the
Yeah,
just the dance back and forth allows you to kind of somehow halt that process. I'm not sure.
that's really interesting. I'm not sure if this is what you meant by it, but what it brings up for me is that there are certain things of like, when I point to emotional challenge, like challenges in youth that led to these uh, to my needing to engage in kind of trauma healing work, I often hold back from going into details there, because I feel like by being truthful, sometimes what that might serve to do is actually to put on a mask. So
Hmm.
if I emphasize that I come from a kind of working class background and had it, hard in that way, then is that coming from a place of truth? Because when I say it, actually, what it feels like is I'm almost trying to be like, so you should think of me in this way. You should like, I
Yeah,
don't know.
it's like transparency that's not quite transparent or something.
Exactly. It's like a manipulative. It's almost like I want you to think of me as, oh, isn't he impressive for like having transcended like a
Sure.
difficult circumstance? So that's interesting. I've not heard someone. I don't know if that's what you meant by it, but that, yeah, when you said that it feels like you're layering on masks. Yeah, I notice. I notice that as well. But then in that way, I guess this is kind of what I meant before, when truthfulness uh, isn't just about the statements you make, because like, while that's a literally true statement, I was saying, like, in your posturing, the way you present yourself, the effects you want to have on people, that's where we're really talking about transparency. And
Mm.
I mean, again, maybe connection really is the ultimate thing we're talking about here, because if I say something that's technically true, but it's because I want to achieve a certain uh, mind state in you with regards to me, then there's an attempt to control. There's an attempt to make you different somehow to what you are, or to stop this process from being as authentic and as connected and as transparent as it is. So I think, yeah, connection is perhaps a deeper principle than even truth. Um, yeah.
And yeah, no, I'm watching kind of what we're doing and why we're doing it. It seems like there's a light that's being shone on the motions in your life, and I've thought about this recently. Just probably conducting some kind of a possibly conducting some kind of experiment where I just kind of name kind of reasons I'm doing every single thing for a whole day or something, or maybe even just for an hour or a week, possibly. Who knows? But this kind of um, naming and ritualizing, I guess, every single action, I thought would be an interesting experiment. Mm.
Mm.
Yeah.
In a way, to yourself, to be transparent with what's happening.
Yeah, to kind of be able to kind of see and direct in a different way, and to see what would come out of that if there would be any noticings, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's funny. The way that I tend to think about uh, this kind of non-dual insight stuff is that the world itself is not conceptual, and the reason you point that out is because we typically see through our concepts. We use language, and I think this is a cup that I'm drinking from. Uh, but then, actually, if I were to interrogate, well, what is cupness, or what is it for something to be a cup? What you realize is there is no essence of cup in it. It's a kind of relational descriptor for something I can drink from. It's a cup when I say it's a cup, basically, and everything's like that, really. It's
Mm-hmm.
nothing
Yeah.
intrinsically is anything. It's language is a way of signifying, and chunking things into concept and discriminating. And when you get rid of that discriminating, then that's when you fall into this mindset of just awe at everything existing in this like, well, it's actually not split into different things. I'm interdependent on everything else. It's a whole
Yeah.
unnameable thing. And so um, I remember as a teenager, I was very into nature, still am, and I wanted to learn about all the different flowers, but I really didn't want to learn their names because I felt quite vividly that I
Mm.
liked to behold things just as they were. And if I could say, oh, yeah, that's a whatever, silver mallow or something, like,
Take that away.
uh, then you've just, yeah, ticked it off, and I can just kind of move on with my day. And even just at a subtle level, even if I'm there and I'm trying to engage with it, I feel like the concepts take us away from direct experience. Um, yeah, so then I have a slight aversion to using language, like, in any kind of practice around what you might call spiritual stuff. So when people do like noting, you know, or counting the breath, anything that's conceptual, feels to me like it's moving in the wrong direction. I quite like something people can play around with is to get into this state of non-dual awareness of just being, which is what it is one way is kind of awareness of awareness. I would say that's not a way to describe the end goal, but it's a way you can try to like bootstrap yourself into this state of just getting out of thought and just being. And then one way you can become aware of the kind of spacious awareness in which everything arises in your experience is to use a mantra that's intentionally a nonsense sound. So blah would be a kind of conventional one, but even that I guess has a sense of meaning. But just saying something like that, and again, it's nice because it doesn't have a conceptual meaning. Um, and then just hearing this, thinking it in your mind, hearing it as a sound, and then noticing the space in which it arises. That's a great practice to just kind of to suddenly go, wait a minute, I'm not the thing that's saying the word blah. There's just there's a spaciousness, and the word blah is arising, and everything's just arising in this spacious awareness. It's just here now. And then the end goal, these are, again, these are still concepts. The end goal is just to be and just truly let go into a state of what you might call non-meditation, where you're just being, just sitting like this in Zen. Um, yeah, that's the main kind of practice. I mean, not the mantra thing, but just getting to that state of just being, for me, is my main practice.
Yeah, that, yeah, it's I kind of have a similar thing. I thank you for sharing that idea. Kind of, I think I can alter that experiment a little bit around that, which might be a bit of fun. I also have the same kind of um, yeah, I move in the same direction. I've got all these kind of playlists that are based on vibes, and I don't know the name of any of the songs. And I do the same thing with tea, actually. So I know what the essence of the tea is, but I wouldn't know what's in the specific
Oh, nice.
blends. So I can definitely kind of relate to that. There's something came up around the idea of moving through uh, our own versions of reality or the unified one, and the sense of um, doing it without our traditional senses. And I know you've done. I'm sure you've done quite a bit of study in terms of perception. And I was wondering what comes up for you when I share this. I've got a little son, and we went for a walk on the beach recently, and I was walking to meet him and his mother. And as I was walking to meet him, I thought I'd just try closing my eyes and walking with my eyes closed, and just kind of because it was quite a wide amount of beach area. And yeah, I found the journey to be, quite incredible, just in that kind of short space, in that short period. And then I held his hand, and what we walked back with our eyes closed, and it was quite nice to see kind of that process unfold, and to feel into that, and then to see how far we had come. And I was thinking, maybe, or feeling into this rather idea of, maybe that's the way to move through life for me anyways. And this idea of not using traditional senses, and finding ways to um, close my eyes, so to speak, and walk walk in a different way. And yeah, because it seems like the senses have become compromised to a large extent, especially with everything that's happening in the way that it's happening. Yeah, does anything come up for you in that share?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I would say it makes me think of the learning to trust yourself thing I spoke about before. That, like,
Mm,
you, in the moment before you close your eyes, you know that you're not walking towards the beach, towards the ocean, and you know you're not walking towards a cliff, or there's a preparing yourself for that. There's a self care and a kind of um, yeah, a process of self love there at play, that's looking out for your best interests. And to me, that's an important, hugely important process. But it's interesting what you said about the way our senses are compromised with, the way I interpret that is our current kind of propagandized media landscape, where very little is, in terms of sense making, it's very difficult to kind of uh, find reliable narratives. And if you're walking along the beach and you can't see very well, and then you go and you buy glasses, and there are things we can do to improve our seeing to be good enough that we feel safe. And I think that's again, in this analogy, the goal isn't to see everything clearly. The goal isn't to have a microscope and to be able to see the shape of every single grain of sand on the beach. You
mm,
don't need a perfect 100% picture of everything. You just need to know that you're broadly safe. Because existence isn't safe. It's not fundamentally safe. Like, we we will die, harm will come to us or people we love, and that's just kind of part of the game. And so we have to learn to be okay with that uncertainty, and to see well enough that we know that we can be safe. And then ultimately, we spoke about the fear of death and how it can be overcome with this non-dual perspective. You That's important as well, because that allows you to really get into this level of non-attachment, where you're like, I'm going to walk along the beach with my eyes closed. If it turns out there's a you know, miraculously there's a open manhole in front of me, even though it's on a beach, which is highly unlikely. But if it turns out that's the case and I fall down it and that's how I died, okay, that's how I died. Like, I'm going to die at some point. like that it just happens, like, it could happen at any point. So being okay with that in a deep way, where you're not just bypassing your fear of death, but you're contextualizing it, getting out of this egoic, ruminative, evolved psychology that's obsessed with our own survival, um, is, to me, is a really helpful way forward.
Would you be able to speak to me around the living mirror of consciousness theory that you kind of developed, and
Mhm.
maybe yeah, maybe it would be nice to just explore that with you and see if I'm wrapping my head around it in the way that
Yeah.
you know.
So there are a few different ways you could describe it. To me, maybe one way you could describe it is to say that, what consciousness is not. I mentioned earlier how it's not separate from what we are as physical, embodied, living things. Um, so what you can understand it to be is an interfacing process. It's like an activity. It's not really it's not like a substance or a material or something like that. It's a process more than a thing. It's a which is why it seems to be immaterial. It doesn't seem to be like a substance. So it's a way of interfacing with the rest of the world. And when you look at when you look at our universe, life, living systems are the kinds of things that need to do that. They're little islands of order that keep themselves together against all of the kind of destructive forces in the universe for a period of time. And to do that, you need to interface with the world around you. So, in a big picture level, you could say consciousness is it's like this relational thing. The universe becomes living things, and then the universe knows itself through living things, through interfacing with itself. So that's a kind of big picture view of it. You can also flesh it out, as I've done in the kind of academic work, in as like a rigorous scientific theory of, like, here's the biophysics, thermodynamics of life, and here's why it necessarily entails a process that we model with something called Bayesian inference, where it's like, this relates to kind of the predictive processing model of the brain, where to be a living system, you need to be predicting what's going to happen in the next moment. So if I'm walking down the street and then there's a bus, uh, moving towards me, and one moment it's a certain size of my retina, the next moment it's bigger, then bigger, then bigger. If my brain and if as a whole organism, I interpret that as just moment by moment. Okay, that now it's bigger, now it's bigger, now it's bigger. I need to be predicting into the future, because time is always flowing. I need to navigate through the world. That's what it is to be a living thing. I need to predict that because it's getting bigger, it's going to get even bigger, and that means it's getting closer to me and it's going to hit me. So to live, you need to do that process of prediction. We're always feeling slightly into the future to feel what happens next, because the world fundamentally isn't 100% safe, like I said earlier. Um, so yeah, you can think of it in these different ways, in a kind of technical, like how the thermodynamics of life necessitates this predictive process of knowing the world around you, or in this more poetic, life is the way the universe comes to know itself, and that process of knowing is consciousness.
Hmm. So yeah, so where did just curious in terms of the footsteps through the sand and the presence in each footstep and the non-predictive nature of that walk, I guess. Um, because there's a deep presence in the moment of each step. Maybe there is prediction going on some level in the background. But I've just, yeah, that kind of comes up for me, and I'm wondering how that theory kind of informs the way that you may live your life, or you may go through, your steps.
Yeah, it's so on one level, it makes it feel. I mean, I'm putting the cart before the horse a bit here, because I already had a certain worldview when I came to this theory, but it reifies this worldview for me of home in the universe. We are an unfolding of it. Our conscious experiences of the universe knowing itself through us. Um, So we're not these little isolated, lonely machines that are irrelevant. We're part of this process, and consciousness is a fundamentally natural like part of the world, kind of waking up to itself. Uh, and so I think that's a great vision of existence. And the most consequential thing I would say is that it's really made me confront issues of suffering and harm causing in the world, because I, you know, the traditional way of thinking is don't don't hurt a cat or a dog because they're almost certainly conscious, although philosophers disagree. We all tend to think someone who like kicks a cat for no reason is not behaving wisely or nicely because we think the cat can suffer. Um, People, when it comes to kind of setting rat traps or something, they'll most people probably still feel like there's an issue there of like it probably feels pain, and but then other people would deny it. Then you get down to insects or say fish. A lot of people say fishing is fine because they can't feel pain, but in this picture they would feel pain. And you get down to kind of killing insects, and again it gets a lot more fuzzy here. It'd be interesting to know the statistics and how many people think it's an insect suffers if you swat it or something. But then you go even further, and now in this picture, all of those things can suffer, and single celled bacteria can as well. So if you take an antibiotic that kills, all these little single cell things in your system, or even if you wash your hands, you're killing a lot of living things that will suffer in those moments.
Can you show me how
So
that links with the theory, James? I'm just kind of,
yeah, so
if you could help me with that
any
bridge.
the idea with the theory is that part of the problem with the kind of the dominant way of thinking in the neuroscience of consciousness is a focus on the brain as a kind of as the causal mechanism behind generating consciousness, a kind of machine way of thinking. Um, Whereas I think the correlation between brain activity and consciousness in us is actually consciousness exists as an interface in a loop between us and the environment. But in us, it does run through the brain, this process. So there are correlations, but there are also correlations. Um, I taste coffee. I tend to taste coffee when I'm drinking coffee. So there's correlations with other physical things in the world as well. So I'm saying brains aren't strictly necessary for consciousness. They are in us for us to kind of just the way we're structured. But in other living systems, they don't need a brain. What they need is to be an embodied living system. That's the relevant thing to being conscious. Now, the first form of life, the simplest form of life, is a single-celled organism, like an amoeba, like a bacterium, and they evolved into multicellular things that have operate by the same principles. But I'm saying if life is the important thing, then feeling should exist in single-celled organisms as well, in bacteria. So when I mean when you wash your hands, or say you put antibacterial gel on your hands, as we've all been doing with COVID, the idea is to create an environment that's inhospitable for life. And so anything living cells, living single-celled organisms on your hands will find themselves in an environment they need to escape from. And the feeling of negativity, pain, suffering is the drive to escape. So if the room I'm in suddenly caught on fire, I would feel that to be negative, and that feeling is synonymous with me trying to escape from it. And if something feels nice, it's a signal to kind of stay with it. And if eating feels good because it's synonymous with something we want to be doing, generally. So in this picture, there's a lot of suffering going on, and suffering is a kind of inherent part of existence for living things. Um, and that's quite a thing. If you think that's true, that's quite a thing to reckon with. And even I mean, if you take the hand washing thing, at first when I thought that doesn't seem plausible because that's so much suffering we're causing. Maybe suffering is not the right word. Maybe I should say pain or negativity, or I would say negativity valenced experience would be the technical way to say it. But then, actually, if you think about the vast majority of human history, we weren't washing our hands. We didn't have chemicals to do that. So it makes sense that these living things would live on our hands, but now we've come up with a way to kind of exterminate them in this routine way. And so, even if you think this, if you're not willing to accept that this is plausible, for me at least, it started to open my eyes to the way how existing negatively causes harm to other things. So, I'm broadly vegetarian in my diet, but then I started thinking about, well, I have a farm in Portugal where I am now. We're building a retreat center, and we had to till the ground. And then after that, I was thinking, well, how many, are there moles in the ground whose nests have been disturbed? Are there insects that got killed in that process? Um, and they think, well, if I'm buying vegetables from a supermarket, how many animals are being harmed in that process? And yet,
Mm.
most vegetarians who are doing it for ethical reasons like to think, okay, I've done it. I've extracted myself from the harming of animals in my food production. But then it was because of my theory, I suddenly was like, wait a minute, that's an illusion. That's not, I mean, it's still an improvement on directly, factory farming, but like, so it's allowed me to confront the complexity here ethically, and to feel that to exist as a living thing is to cause harm inevitably, but that the wise way forward is to learn to be emotionally grounded and at peace enough to be okay with that, in a way where you can know that you're trying to navigate the world as best as you can. So the pathological thing to do would be to go, screw it. I no longer care about human suffering because there's so much suffering happening all the time anyway. And I'm just going to eat from factory farmed animals because I'm now desensitized to, because I think there's so much suffering in the world. Um, that would be a way of creating a block, or like trying to suppress the negative feelings by just kind of dismissing them. For me, the ultimate way forward, or the end point with living a good life, is to live in a state of staying with one's anxieties, with one's challenges and difficulties, in a way where you can integrate them and you can stay with them. Um, that process, to me, is what it is to be a person. Is to we don't find ourselves in a utopia or a hell. We find ourselves in this mixed middle ground, and so we just have to navigate our way through it and use our feelings to navigate. So I would say existence is a navigation problem, and that's fine. Most of us, or a lot of people, especially when emotional stress gets too high, they want nice and neat solutions. They want to say, I, you know, I can live this lifestyle and I can call myself a perfectly ethical person. And then if you bring up how the minerals in the microchips were got through slave labor and mines in Africa and stuff like that, they don't want to hear it. And so that's a neurotic, disconnected way of being in my view. And it's a challenge, but I think people feel like if they're sometimes they feel like if the living with ambiguity is not a satisfactory endpoint, they want certainty. But again, that typically comes from when there's why would you need certainty? Why would you need to aggressively reify beliefs and to hold on to them strongly? Usually because you feel unsafe or you've faced challenges. And I mean, this is ultimately what leads to extremism in politics as well, when it comes to things like fascism, where people just want nice, simple narratives where they can say that outgroup is to blame, project all of the problems on that outgroup, and if we persecute them, then we'll feel like we're moving into a positive place because we've just consolidated all of our anxieties into one place and we're dealing with it. And that's a kind of delusional, highly dangerous way to be. And so what I'm advocating is the inverse of that, is a state of, instead of coming up with quick fixes that are delusional, you stay with the open um, uncertainty of being, which is just the state we find ourselves in.
Yeah, it sounds like a kind of similar thing to the walking on the beach, and a similar thing to these
Right.
psychotherapeutic kind of motions that you go through, working through emotional trauma. And
Exactly. I'd say emotional health is one of the most important things that, if one of the best things I think we could do for our culture would be to have a norm where we talk about emotional health and we make it a kind of centerpiece of the culture, where we don't celebrate toxic individuals and reify their egos. Instead, we have a nuanced understanding of what it means to be emotionally grounded and healthy. And yeah.
can you tell me a little bit more about the retreat center? I'm conscious of time and I don't want to take up more than you may have available. So just feel free to let me know, maybe
Thank you.
if you want to shut things down soon, that's fine. But yeah, I'm curious to know more about this place, this place in
Yeah,
Portugal where the internet goes out from time to time, and
yeah,
it seems like the wild winds are blowing quite strongly.
yeah. The internet's now stable, thankfully. We've upgraded, so but yeah, thank you for having me here. I should wrap up soon, but yeah. So it's called the Surrender Homestead. That's the tag on like Instagram's the main
Oh,
place
that fits in
I'm
nicely.
posting.
Yeah.
Yes, it was my wife's coining the name, and it's this concept of surrender is really important to both of us. Um, I've discovered that some people, I was going to say some people have negative associations with it. But what I probably should say is some egos have a negative association with surrender. But that's precisely why it's so important. I mean, I guess people can have a conception of domination and that kind of surrender to, but to us, it's this surrendering to and trusting existence to hold you and just surrendering to that unfolding. Um, so yeah, we're hopefully 2023 we may be able to start having some retreats. It's going to be very small and intimate, maybe 8 people at a time. And yeah, the kind of themes that I spoke about here a lot, I feel like I'm going to see how it kind of evolves naturally and take feedback from people and see what people need, what people want. But the overarching framework that I kind of work in is this one of non-dual insight. Ideally, you may come having had one of these experiences of kind of mystical experience, unity, enlightenment, awakening, whatever you call it, and or you may try to access it through these meditation techniques, like I mentioned before, um, and then this process of integrating it. So that could be through somatic body work, but it could just be through meditation, spending time in nature here, potentially plant medicine. So yeah, there's a few things we're throwing into the mix. Um, and it's been a long project. It's been a few years now. We've been trying to build it, but it's getting there, and could be as early as 2023 that we'll start having retreats.
Well, my friend, I'm sending you plenty of supportive vibes on that journey, and
Thank you.
yeah, looking forward to kind of hearing about that flourishing. And it seems like it's quite a beautiful thing to be, birthing into the sphere at this time.
Yeah, so we're in a beautiful place in the mountains in southern Portugal. The weather's great. It's a fruit farm. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Cool. Would you just, I'll definitely put some links and everything in the chat. And yeah, did you want to share a little bit about how people might be able to check out your stuff, the YouTube channel or Living Mirrors podcast?
Yeah, thank you. So the easiest place to find everything I'm up to is if you go to drjamescooke.com. Cooke has an E on the end. And that will have kind of articles I've written, linked to the podcast Living Mirrors with Dr. James Cooke, which you can get video version on YouTube, audio, Spotify, usual places, where I interview people on these kinds of topics. Yeah, I'd say that's the main place to look. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for taking this space and time to listen deeply and, yeah, engage with this conversational space. I really appreciate your presence. And yeah, if you want to get more information around Dr. James and his work, you can head over to todaydreamer.com or check out the show notes section. If you'd like to get in touch with me personally to deepen your connection with this family that I'm forming, this community around the show, then please feel free to email me, michael@todaydreamer.com. And if you visit todaydreamer.com, there'll most probably be some offerings available to help you cultivate that practice of presence more fully. So yeah, hope you're well out there. Sending my love and appreciation, and until next time, be well.